Hello, my name is Christian Thompson and I am the Director of Product here at Omnos. And today I'm going to introduce to you our latest and most comprehensive blood test so far, and that is the Omnos Wellness 360 blood test. So we're going to talk a little bit more as we go through this, exactly what the Wellness 360 blood test is, when and why to take this test, a little bit about the different sample collection methods such as venous draw and finger prick testing when it comes to blood tests, that is, what markers are included in the Wellness 360 blood test, and what the difference between this test is and other tests are. So without further ado, let's introduce the Wellness 360 blood test from Omnos. Now, the first thing to understand is in its current form, it is a combination of the Wellness Complete blood tests and the sex hormone complete blood test. So we are looking to bring together more areas of health analysis into one space rather than having smaller siloed tests, or not siloed tests, but smaller tests that look at more specific areas. And I'll come into exactly why we're doing this in a moment. Now, anyone that knows about our Wellness Complete test will know it's generally looking at our vital organ health, looking at the systems and function of those organs, so relating to our digestive system, our kidney, our liver, our heart, for example, some of our vitamins and minerals. Whereas our sex hormones test is looking at a very comprehensive section of our sex hormones. So looking at the pituitary hormones that then will create the reaction from places like our thyroid or adrenal gland, and our gonadal axis, which is the testicles for men and the ovaries for women. So there's quite a lot of things that go into both of those tests individually, and here we're looking to combine them. Now, before we talk about what the reason for doing smaller and more focused tests or broader tests, first we need to understand what the human body is and what human health represents. So realistically, the human body is a combination of specialized systems, each one relying on the next to maintain optimal function. And in fact, it's very difficult to see where one system begins and another ends. They're so interconnected that trying to separate them out into little boxes, like we often try to do in science, can be one, quite arrogant, and two, misleading almost. Our lymphatic system is considered a system by itself, but it's very much the immune system. But then 50% of the immune system sits in the gastrointestinal tract. So, and the lymphatic system almost maps and mirrors the vascular network. So, these various systems can have quite strong impact on each other. So, if the vascular network is failing, well, then what happens to your heart? What happens to your lungs? If your digestive system is failing, what happens to your immune system? What happens to your lymphatic system? What happens to your circulatory system? They all have these relevant connective spaces. I mean, even our adipose tissue, our fat tissue, has a strong impact on how our immune system functions. How our immune cells function within fatty tissue can have a really strong impact on how your liver functions. So this interconnectivity of the body is a very important thing to understand before we try to even think about what we're going to test and why. And this doesn't mean that when we're testing with more finite set of biomarkers that we can't get good objective data. But when we do test a smaller set of biomarkers, we can also miss vital information of why our health is declining. And another important thing to note is that any amount of data, objective data that is, that you're going to get from a small set of blood markers tested or a larger set of markers tested, any amount of data you're going to get is going to move you forwards in terms of your understanding of what's going on. Obviously, the more data we can collect on someone, generally, the more information we'll have, the better understanding we'll have what's going on. But it doesn't mean we always need those larger data sets. But there are times where we do. Now, how we might find out whether we do or don't is by looking at symptoms, for example. So when we have clear symptoms that point to clear systems or clear issues, and we're like, oh, that's a really good clue into we need to test this exact system. This only things relating to digestion are going on. Well, the Wellness Complete is probably a pretty good place to start. Now, that digestion could be linked to immune system, it could be linked to fatty acid metabolism, it could be linked to physically breaking down food, it could be linked to absorbing, assimilating food, it could also be linked to excreting toxins. So there's still quite a few things to take into account, even when we know it's down into one system. But we can be a lot more specific when we're confident based on our symptoms that we're looking at one specific place. Because, like I said, they give us an overall context of what's going on. But when we have symptoms coming from a large range of different areas of health, looking at specific combinations of these symptoms may give us a good indication that we need to go broader first before we chunk down into more finite and laser focused areas, because we might not know what's going on, and if we look too specific too soon, we will miss all of the key things going on around that. So in these circumstances, I do prefer to go for broader tests first and then smaller and more fine-tuned tests later as we retest and move forwards. So some of these things I've listed here on the slides, such as stress-related symptoms when combined with digestive symptoms. If you're having, what we would consider to be stress-related symptoms in combination with digestive symptoms, they can often be chicken and egg. If you are overly stressed, producing too much sympathetic tone, too many stress hormones, that can blunt your digestive secretions and then create issues. So, we've got to look at whether the digestive issues are causing the stress or being caused by the stress. So it's often very good to look at both your stress hormones and things related to digestion to get a better picture of this. Similar things can be said for hormonal related symptoms and detoxification or toxic exposure. Certain toxins will disrupt hormones naturally. So are your hormones, if you've got hormone symptoms, how's your liver coping? Is there any evidence of some things going on? We can do this with other tests as well. We can actually look at combining, for example, the envirotoxin test with the sex hormones test, or the urine metabolite hormones test, which is also known as the Dutch test, with the sex hormones test. And we can look at more specific things relating to how your liver is functioning and processing hormones, or how it's coping with other elements and toxic elements within the body. So there are other ways that we can combine tests like this, but now Wellness 360 is bringing it into one test specifically, rather than having you double or triple up into other test spaces, and making that a more cost-effective medium for you as well. So Omnos, again, one of our aims is democratizing health. So we're trying to lower the barrier, increase capacity for access to more information for you. So this is one of our initiatives we've been working on a little while, and we're bringing this out now. So moving on, now we understand a little bit more about why and when to take this test. I want to move on a little bit about our sample collection. So now the Omnos Wellness 360 test will only be available via venous draw collection. Now, the key reason for this is that with finger prick testing, you can be limited and restricted by the size or the amount of biomarkers you want to test. So, for example, if you were to try to collect enough blood to run this test via a finger prick test, you'd probably be trying to fill 4 of those microvials that you get if you've done one of our finger prick blood tests already. So I wouldn't want to do that myself, nor would I want to ever ask anyone to do that. So hence why we will not be offering this as a finger prick test. We'll only be offering this as a venous draw test. So the difference between venous draw and finger prick are literally just to do with the collection method. With a finger prick test, you prick your finger and you collect from the capillaries in the finger, whereas a venous draw, you're having a qualified phlebotomist, which is generally a nurse or a doctor, but there are non-medical phlebotomists as well that can collect directly from the veins. Generally, you'll see someone collecting from the arm. Most people have had their blood taken at some point in their life already, so it's just that same process. Now, the risks of self-collection at home when you're doing finger prick test is that you're not professional, and therefore you can have accidents, or you can make mistakes, or some people maybe don't understand or maybe don't read the instructions, and that's why they make the mistakes too. So those mistakes can lead to it taking too long to collect the blood, which can lead to clotting, which means the sample will fail, or they might even be pressing their finger too hard and then creating damage to the components of the blood coming out into the vial and cause something called hemolysis, which will make it impossible for us to accurately measure some of the markers in the vial, or that we're trying to get from the sample. And like I said before, by opening it up into venous draw, we're actually increasing the capacity of the type of markers that we can measure. There are certain markers that we just can't measure in finger prick testing because the sample is too small. Okay, so well, as I said before, the Wellness 360 in its current form is a combination of these two tests, the Wellness Complete and the Sex Hormones Complete. But in the future, there will be differences. We start to see some of these tests branch off into their own life and own being, because we are able to add certain markers specifically that are only available in venous draw that weren't previously available in finger prick. We will be adding and adding to these things as much as we can to increase the visibility of health that we can get from any individual test, and also the value that we can provide to our customers from Omnos. And so the next thing to cover is exactly what's included in the blood test. So this is the current set of markers included in the Wellness 360 blood test, which, as I said, is just a combination of the two tests previously mentioned. The only difference between the male and female test realistically is the male test gets PSA as well. Now, most of the female markers, most of those sex hormone markers are needed for both sexes. PSA is the only one that's really needed for males only, because females don't have prostate. And PSA is for measuring prostate specific antigen, which is to do with inflammation in the prostate, to put it simply. But we can see here there's quite a broad spectrum of markers that allow us to test things from so our protein markers, which can give us great insight into our digestion, some vitamins and minerals, a complete range of our sex hormones, looking at stress hormones, looking at our thyroid health, looking at the balance between cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, which can be very important. Our pituitary regulating hormones such as progesterone, prolactin, that may have additional context or indicators of why some of our sex hormone ratios may be off, or some of our sex hormone levels may be off. And when we combine all this information together, for example, like insulin sensitivity, we can see that HbA1c, obviously, which is looking at your average blood glucose over 3 months, has a very strong indicator of insulin sensitivity or blood sugar regulation. So is omega-6, omega-3 ratio. So is cholesterols. Cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglyceride. But also, so is DHEA sulfate. So is sex hormone binding globulin. And a few other sex hormone markers as well do have good relationships with insulin sensitivity. So by combining these things, we can actually create more informational visibility than we could by just looking at one or the other, because the combination of the two really complement each other into giving us that better visibility and that better capacity to focus in on the areas that really matter. So what is the difference between the Wellness 360 and other tests? So when we consider other blood tests, the key difference is just the number of markers that we're testing. Each test that we've done before is just as accurate, just as useful. It just may be useful in different circumstances. So as I've discussed, when we see a broader set of symptoms coming from many areas, there's lots of noise going on, we don't really know where to start, the Wellness 360 can be an amazing place to get you started, because then from there we can then narrow down into other spaces and retest in smaller test sections rather than start doing such broad tests all the time. Now, again, if we then want to compare this to other tests that we already offer through other sample collection methods, such as the urine-based hormones test or the EnviroTox test or the microbiome test, these are looking at different sample types and can often work in combination with this test or any of the other blood tests, but they will all have their specific niches. So again, if you're not sure what's going on, there's symptoms coming from multiple spaces, it may be better to start with this test and then move into those other tests. Whereas if you're pretty sure that it's your gut bacteria that are causing the issue, this test isn't going to be so useful, and you better go for the microbiome test. So there's going to be specific scenarios where you want to go for each individual test And we are creating videos on each test to help you understand that a little bit more. And there is plenty of information online about each test to help you understand that a bit more, as well as more features and products coming soon, which should be out as much as January, which will help you rank the tests in a number of importance, or in terms of importance, to which test is going to be most useful for you if you're still not sure which one to take. But like I said, each test is accurate, precise to its function. It's just the Wellness 360 is now looking at a much broader spectrum of information than the other tests previously were. So I hope that has been useful for you. I've tried to keep this short so you don't have to watch for too long. But if you're ready to get yourself tested and not sure where you want to start, Wellness 360 is a great place to start. And you can visit our website, Omnos, www.omnos.me. Go to the shop page, look at the wellness range or the blood test range, and you should find the Wellness 360 test there. Thank you guys for listening, and I will speak to you all another time very soon.